My name is Adam Thibodeaux. I'm an architect and a clinical assistant professor at the University of Buffalo School of Architecture and Planning. And today I will be presenting Hunting the Kingfish on uncovering and reclaiming exurban queer sanctuary spaces. So my research primarily deals with the uncovering and reclaiming of buildings that once sheltered populations marginalized by difference. In recent years, I've specifically targeted queer gathering spaces that exist outside of major urban centers where they sort of exist at a critical juncture of community sustaining importance, but also necessitated secrecy. As such, the methods of research that I've developed are forced to navigate outside of traditional archives, conversations with bar patrons and neighbors who may have, once noticed men in leather smoking outside, a now abandoned warehouse. At the start of the pandemic, however, my research moved into modes of digital exploration, particularly because in March 2020, I had just left my hometown of Lafayette, Louisiana, after visiting family for the Mardi Gras holiday. On that trip, when I was discussing my research, I caught word of a bar called the famous Kingfish, a little shed on the edge of the bayou outside of Bro Bridge is all I was really told. Familiar enough with the area, I knew that wasn't much to go off of, as nondescript sheds like this one, photographed in 1938, are the dominant typology of exurban Louisiana, where priority really is sheltering crawfish boats from the occasional hurricane. Often, built quickly and cheaply without the intention to last as long as they often do. Back in Buffalo, and sort of homebound by the pandemic, I turned to the internet. My first lead was a YouTube video titled Famous Kingfish, I Want to Go Back, uploaded by the Basin Bum on September 22nd, 2012. I will go ahead and play a little bit of it as I talk. So the video presents a parking lot full of dancing young adults, lit by the blue glow of overhead parking lamps. A comment identifies Fantasy by Debbie Deb playing in the background. One commenter acknowledges that, quote, "This video is so rare because everyone was so paranoid of cameras." And others echo a sort of similar level of reverence. One says, "Great rare footage," and another, "Unless you've been there, you would never know." So the scene, is ephemeral, but the video gives it evidentiary authority. In particular, the building in the distance is, barely noticeable, but its brief appearance is self-identifying. At the 5-second mark, a bald, genderless figure in a black coat with white skin, what appears to be needles protruding from his scalp, probably a costume of Pinhead from Hellraiser, passes in front of the camera, and the figure, briefly covers and then reveals the word "famous" spelled out in halogen bulbs on the side of a prefab metal shed not too far beyond the crowd. The shed and the needled figure, they tell a brief story of pretty unique architecture that, as mentioned before, can't be traced through historic records or property deeds. The late 1980s saw an upswing in a number of short-lived ad hoc dance clubs across the United States and Europe, paralleling the popularity of MDMA, also known as ecstasy or today as Molly. Most large cities in the South had at least one of these clubs, which have, since been memorialized through fringe documentaries and memorabilia. However, these sanctuaries were also popular in the exurbs, but kept as much closer secrets there due to increasing conservatism outside of city centers. So the famous Kingfish is an example of one of these venues, which serves a very sort of specific clientele. So the YouTube video sparked my interest. So I turned to a Google search for the famous Kingfish, which provided 3 relevant links. The first was an Amazon listing by the company Louisiana T-shirts for a gray shirt with a vector graphic of a crown above the word fish and the caption, "Yeah, but did you die?" The second is a link to a local news article from 2018 posted by the Daily Advertiser of Lafayette, Louisiana, titled "A Party Until Sunrise, Kingfish Was the Place to Be." It features a video of an undecorated prefab metal shed with a brief shot of a dark, sort of nondescript interior filled with scrap wood. Text on the video reads, "Kingfish, a famous nightclub in the 1980s, sits abandoned in 2018. Fans as far as New Orleans and Houston once filled the club." The article provides a brief history of the building. Its founder, DJ Brooks Taylor, was inspired by the larger, more well-known Stark Club in Dallas, which is the subject of a popular 2009 documentary that's now available on Netflix, to start his own dance club in an empty field on the edge of the Vermilion River, just south of Bayou Teche. He admits that the club was short-lived, but widely popular after getting a reputation as an ecstasy club, which opened at 2 a.m. on Saturdays and closed when customers left in the Sunday morning sun. Another DJ, Carl Rochon, recalls a drug bust at the end of Kingfish's life, which sent people jumping the fence on the backside and running into the swamp to get away. In a seemingly continued effort to maintain its secrecy, the article does not identify the shed's location. The video provides no obvious identifiers of what could be one of many empty swamps south of Lafayette, other than perhaps a few oddly out-of-place palm trees. The third link on Google to LouisianaDanceHalls.com leads to little more than a one-sentence description and 2 broken image links. However, it provides a critical piece of evidence, which is an address listed as 1099 Lake Martin Road. So, searching the address on Google Maps led to this very uniquely 21st century hunt, which I'll briefly walk you through. An initial sticking point is that 1099 Lake Martin Road directs to a small house on a short road that leads to the swamp tours of Acadiana on Lake Martin. Satellite and street views provide no evidence of a metal shed matching the one seen in the Daily Advertiser video. When you pan over down the road where it tees into the swamp tours across the lake, it then leads you to Prairie Highway 353, which runs perpendicular to that first road we were on. When you zoom in and you scroll west, as the highway crosses the Vermilion River, Google Maps reveals a second name, Lake Martin Road, which is confusingly unrelated to the street where the pin initially dropped. Near this intersection, a pin once listed Mudbugs Mud Park as an amusement park ride, but when I checked this morning, it's now labeled as lodging. And then another Google search leads to the Facebook page of Mudbugs Mud Park, which meets 1 day per month in the adjacent swamp, permitting, quote, only 4x4s, no race quads or dirt bikes allowed. The page's 1,463 photos of 4x4s in the swamp do not, unfortunately, include any building. However, the street view of this intersection reveals a pretty familiar scene. Zooming in past what appears to have once been a large parking lot, you can spot what appears to be the shed from the Daily Advertiser video next to three, unmistakably out of place palm trees. Mudbugs Mud Park has a small sign at the road, but then a closer inspection on satellite view suggests that the group congregates in the swamp beyond the former Kingfish shed, using its driveway only for sort of access from the bayou to the road, and perhaps leaving the shed vacant as it appears in the Daily Advertiser video. Google Maps does not show the address as 1099 Lake Martin Road, but the Kingfish is unmistakable to the trained eye, although, perhaps not to the casual observer, as it's been stripped of its halogen bulbs and any other sort of exterior identifiers. It's very likely that, the mudbugs are unaware that they occupy once sacred grounds. So, the appropriation of existing or prefabricated structures in service of subcultural assembly, it's not a new phenomenon. The famous Kingfish is likely one of many late 1980s examples of a shed hiding a dance club. But perhaps of interest is the way that these buildings existed then and exist now through collective memory and storytelling. Knowledge, once limited to word of mouth transfer and now open to proliferate through the mass dissemination of information online. The story of the Kingfish, it's set in a unique moment when, home video technology had become widely available, but the means of disseminating these videos to the world had not yet been invented. So the Basin Bums video acts as sort of time capsule, solidified through moving image, documenting an architecture that was never really intended to be documented. Like other architectures of, historic refuge, the Kingfish is memorialized by its imagery, but in a way that is less reverent than it is quotidian. The Basin Bums Kingfish does not exist on a pedestal in a museum, but instead is displayed on the world's largest online video database. It's free to be watched, but not demanding of attention, making it both widely accessible, but also incredibly covert, much like the original shed that was the home of the Kingfish. The architecture of the Kingfish's ghost mirrors the architecture of its life in that way. It exists to be found, but only when looked for. And then the process of hunting for the Kingfish, right? Or hunting for it online, it parallels the process of finding it during its life. It can be traced through digital trails within automatic global databases that provide hints that act like whispers in the parking lot of a gas station along Prairie Highway 353. And although these clues are sparse and unspecific, the robustness of the digital archive amassed by networks, both crowdsourced and automated, like Google and Facebook, allows the stories of these architectures to be told with unprecedented accuracy, and to potentially a much wider audience. During its life, a murmur about the Kingfish may have made its way to New Orleans, but the proximity of its architecture was never as widely accessible as it is today on Google Maps. Its reach is now greater, but perhaps its audience is smaller. The story of its architecture remains precious only to a select few who are tethered to it by the ache of nostalgia and belonging in a time where belonging was hard to come by. In this way, the ghost of the famous Kingfish is less a historic monument than it is sort of a folktale, and inadvertently immortalized by, mass systems of image capture and proliferation. It's likely, that other architectural ghosts remain buried in Google Maps, waiting to be resurrected by the hint of a whisper. Though the audience for those ghosts is, as of yet, kind of unknown. I did actually end up having the chance to visit 1099 Lake Martin Road a year later, shortly after my writing on the Kingfish was published in Burnaway in March of 2021. Um, at this point, my partner and I had started a small project space in Buffalo that's named after Kingfish, with a logo that's adapted from the shirt that I found on Amazon. Um, when we followed the sort of Google Maps out there, we were able to sneak in an unlocked door for a few seconds before we heard tires moving in the gravel behind the shed. Inside was, in fact, the Kingfish herself, frozen in time. Um, I only had time to sort of snap one photo of the disco ball that hung from the roof of the shed before we had to get out. Fortunately, the driveway to the mud park was long enough that we were able to, sort of already make it down the road when we saw a gray pickup pull up alongside the shed, presumably to lock the door. Oh yeah, and this is that one photo I was able to take of the disco ball. So part of me, in that moment wondered if the mud bugs did, in fact know about Kingfish. I wondered if they secretly danced under its disco ball or sang unplugged karaoke on its mirrored stage. I also wondered if they knew that someone from Buffalo had made a pilgrimage out to their side of the bayou after scrolling through their Facebook photos and zooming into their property on Google Maps. And now, I can't help but wonder if they'll watch this video of a stranger talking about them at an architectural conference based in Calgary, which I think is going to be uploaded to YouTube somewhere, in the low trafficked archive alongside the Basin Bums video. Um, Regardless, all of these questions make the world seem very small, but also the networks that bind it seem very large. Thanks for listening.